Hello everybody, and welcome to part 2 of my Unconformities video. This is going to be on Baraboo area in Wisconsin. This is a very awesome place. Everybody who has majored in geology in the Midwest has gone there for either structural geology, sedimentology, stratigraphy, or all the above or combination thereof. So why am I taking you to Baraboo, Wisconsin? Well, I've done many videos from there. I will link a few of them below so you can get more detailed geologic information on the area, and I'm going to take you to a place I've taken you before as well. The first two places, there will be 3 places we'll be going in Baraboo. The first 2 are real close to one another. One's called Abelman's Gorge, and it's an old quarry, and the other one's not that far from it. It's northeast away from Abelman's Gorge, and it's both those locations are on what we call the North Limb. The Baraboo formation basically forms a very large asymmetrical syncline, and I've talked about this before. The North Limb is on the vertical part of the syncline. Devil's Lake, where I've taken you before, and I'm also going to take you again in this video, is on the south limb of the syncline. And in between, or above the syncline, in the bowl of the syncline, if you will, are younger Precambrian sediments, and then the whole thing is capped with Paleozoic rock, which I'm going to get into here in a minute. But this area is important because this is where modern structural geology was figured out. Structural geology is a very complex subject. There's a lot of math involved, a lot of graphic analysis involved. Geology isn't just looking at rocks and going, ooh, ah. I know that is a pretty cool part of it, at least in my opinion, but it's very complex. Okay, I've done like stereographic projection analysis videos before and showing you how to do a stereo net. I'll link that below if I remember to do that as well, if you really want to get into the deep and dirty of how this stuff is done. But anyway, this stuff was figured out how geologic structures project themselves into the subsurface, and how mountainous areas, mountains were produced via orogenies, and orogeny is a mountain building event. And this stuff was figured out before we had a working concept of plate tectonics in the late 19th and early 20th century by people like Charles Leith and Charles Van Hise. And Charles Van Hise would go on to be University of Wisconsin's president. There's a whole hall named after him. But I digress. This is where we figured out how to analyze geologic structures and to piece things together in mountain ranges. It was not figured out, and I've said this before, in Alaska, the Himalayas, the Rockies, the Alps. It was figured out in south central Wisconsin. And there's something else that's really cool about this area, and which is relevant to this video I'm going to focus on. I'm going to focus on the unconformities part. The Baraboo is such a complex area, but I need to narrow it down so this video doesn't end up being like 3 days long. So what you're going to see, essentially, is the first location, Abelman's Gorge, I'm going to take you to. I'm going to show you how we know that the beds of the North Limb are turned vertical or slightly overturned, that they were deposited level and were later deformed to this position. I've already talked about beds in part 1, which will be linked below. Okay? I need to show you that so I can show you how we have an buttress angular unconformity at stop 2. And I'm going to show you where the Baraboo quartzite, the Precambrian metamorphic rock, butts right up next to the Cambrian Galesville member of the Wanawak Formation. And the cool thing about this is, I'm going to show you here, I know, I'll just show you, because I have a bit of Galesville sandstone and a bit of Baraboo quartzite sitting over here. Okay. Here I have a bunch of rocks and what looks like sand, and it is sand. I'll get to that in a second. But what you see here, this is surface stuff I've still got to fleck off. This is a chunk of the Galesville sandstone. And it looks really hard, but if I were to drop this from a meter height, this would shatter. It's friable, but it's not really friable. Like, I can't really scratch at it with my fingers to get it to become sand again. But I had to break some of it up into its sand components, and basically I did it just by tapping lightly on pieces in here. So it didn't take a lot of effort to break apart. Why did I do this? Well, I had to do a grain size analysis on it, and I put it in my lab book. My lab book, due to the analysis, it came out to be a sorted to well-sorted, medium to fine grained sandstone. It's also what we call a quartz arenite. You can see some of the grains here. Can't see them. I mean, you can see some individual ones, okay? And you can tell it's kind of orange in color. Iron, limonite does that to it. It's not orange significantly far from the Baraboo quartzite on the north limb. It becomes white and it becomes more friable. But the reason why I'm showing you this is because this is Cambrian. And it butts right up next to the vertical beds of Baraboo quartzite. And this particular piece has some ripple marks on it. If I could balance it, well, we'll just lay it flat and show you. You can see there's some ripple marks here, okay? And where fresh pieces have broken off, it is generally purple in color. It is a quartzite, but it is also, its parent rock probably wasn't much different than this. All right, except this had a little more iron in it, so it made it more purple. And there are banded iron formations right stratigraphically above this unit. Well, one banded iron anyway. So this, if I dropped from a meter on the floor, probably wouldn't break and it would hurt a lot because it is a low-grade metamorphic rock. All right, so what you're going to see at, is that Catfer? What you're going to see at stop 1 is this. What you're going to see at stop 2 is Baraboo quartzite, and this and their field relationship, the contact between the two, the unconformity in between these rocks. Because what I want to show you ultimately here, what you're going to see is you're going to see the Great Unconformity. All right, there's about 1.2 billion with a B years of missing time between the deposition, not the metamorphism, the deposition of the Baraboo quartzite and of the Cambrian Wanawak formation. So it's a good size chunk of missing time. And where you're going to see it on the north limb is the Galesville smacks right up next to the Baraboo quartzite. And the Galesville does have some initial dip because the Galesville, well, I'll explain it when I'm in the field to you why that is. But it's definitely not a fault, and we can tell it's not a fault contact. It is a depositional contact because the Baraboo syncline, much like it is today, at the end of the Precambrian, was dry land. There were no trees and no vegetation, but it was dry land, and the topography probably wasn't much different than it is today. And it was the topography, there were a lot taller hills than there are today, maybe about twice as tall. But other than that, it generally looks the same. All right, and what happened was the Cambrian seas, the Sauk sequence, came in from what is now the south, because during the Cambrian, North America was not located where it is now, and you can tell from here. This here shows you that the Baraboo syncline stood as islands during the Cambrian when the seas came in. Okay, and the Galesville is basically those beach deposits against those islands. The Galesville continues out away from those islands, but it levels out. the initial dip is lost as you go away from the north limb. There's also, on top of the Galesville locally, there's a conglomerate, and there's at stop 2, that is what we call the Parfrey's Glen Formation. That was derived from the top of the Baraboo cliffs as the sediments buried the islands. Now the third stop, taking you back to Devil's Lake, and I'm going to show you the Great Unconformity there. Now, if we go back to the south limb here, you can see the dips they're not vertical. They're about 15 to 30 degrees depending on where you are on the south limb. So it dips a lot more gently. And you will see a weathered profile on top of the quartzite where the Great Unconformity is. And then on top of it, you're going to see some awesomeness. At least I think it's pretty cool, but I'll save that for the actual field videos. Anyways, I think I've rambled enough about this, so I'm going to take you out to the Baraboo, Wisconsin area so we can look at the Great Unconformity in a couple of places. This is a quarry, 19th, early 20th century. We're going one place in particular, over here. We are going to start in the southeast corner of the old quarry, right here. We're going to look at this wall in detail. Hey, okay, here it is. The southeast wall of Abelman's Gorge. Behind me is essentially south. My back is to south. Now, before I start talking about unconformities, I need to explain something about this wall. A couple of things. First, you'll see ripple marks here. Well developed ripple marks. You see them back here too, but they're not as good. This face, actually right here, between the winter of 2014 in 2015, these good ripple marks fell, and they formed the talus here. I did a publication on it and put it on the website, but these ripples, geologists have been coming to for well over a century, and they finally fell. Like I said, there's more up there, they're not as good. But why am I showing you this when I'm talking about unconformities? Well, because ripple marks don't form on vertical cliffs. Strike and dip is this way. It's essentially east-west right here. Or strike is east-west, my bad. Strike is east-west and dip is vertical, 90 degrees. Or slightly overturned here. We are on the north limb. That syncline I showed you, the part of the Baraboo, goes like this. We're on the vertical part, this part, okay? So these ripples originally deposited flatline, level, and then later through tectonic activity, compression that formed the Baraboo syncline, it was tilted vertical, okay? Now, what does this have to do with any unconformity? Well, because when this was tilted vertical as a syncline, then erosion came after the orogeny that produced this had ceased, erosion dominated, and would eventually leave hills, and they're visible today too, all around us, because these cliffs were vertical. And these also stood as hills during the end of the Precambrian to the Cambrian. All right, so that where the Great Unconformity lies. So these were hills then too. I mean, this right here this was quarried out, but there were hills on this north limb was sticking out above the ground. It was basically like it is now. At the end of the Precambrian, it was above sea level, and erosion was taking place. But during the Cambrian, in the Sauk sequence, the seas would come in from the south, and these stood as islands. And most of this was figured out in the 1970 publication by Dot and others, and it's still really good work on the area. Not much has changed, not much new knowledge has been discovered since that publication. And it's free online if you want to get it. You can just download it. You can have the map and the publication. But I needed to explain to you how we know this north limb of the syncline was originally deposited level and has subsequently been turned vertical because of primary structures like this. These ripple marks tell us that. There's the ripple marks where I just was, that way south. But if you look up, you go to the top of the cliff, you see level lying beds there. That's Cambrian. The Great Unconformity is right up there. But we're not going to climb up there and look at it. We're going to go look at it in much better, more obvious places. And there it's pretty level. It's at the top, okay? But you can tell what kind of rock is up there in the Cambrian, which is above the Great Unconformity up there, because it falls down in the talus once in a while. And it's a sandstone. It's well indurated here, but this is the Cambrian stuff from up top. There's the GPS on that right there. I think I'm close. I forget exactly where this bloody thing is, but I'm gonna find it. And look at here. Look at that. Right there. You see how it's been deformed when the syncline formed. That's where I just took the GPS. You can see we have Cambrian conglomerate filling an old paleo fracture. As I make my way down and around, you can still see that we have conglomeratic sandstone up top here, with sandstone here and here. I'm still looking for the contact. This is a big chunk of fallen sandstone here, and with the amount of conglomerate in it, I would call it Parfrey's Glen, at least here. Parfrey's Glen formation. But see how you have your sandstone here, and the sandstone unweathered is pretty white, but it weathers orange here. And here you have a nice bit of conglomerate. Nice bed, thick bed of conglomerate. Either this is either the top. Actually, we can tell which is top. So I'm gonna stop here for a second. Even though this block is not in place and this sandstone fell from up there somewhere, we can tell which way is top of this fallen block. Now, we know that sedimentary beds are essentially deposited flat, level lying. There are some exceptions to that, but generally they're pretty close. So we know this is the bedding plane, okay? Because we have a conglomerate bed here as a marker. This way is up. How do I know that? Well, the sandstone is Cambrian. We know that, okay? We have burrow structures on top. So this, before this conglomerate was laid down, you had critters here making burrows. So that's up. So this was originally up there, fell, rolled, stopped right here. I think that's pretty cool. Down the bottom, the tracks are right up there. Down here at the bottom, there's no more conglomerate. We see really well developed cross beds here. What is interesting about the sandstone here, Cambrian, is you can see cross beds. We have really good cross beds right here. This is technically an unconformity. Granted, it represents maybe a few days at the most, possibly several weeks, but you see your more level beds here, and then these beds are cross bedded, and it goes that way. This is very pure quartz aeronite, meaning it's almost all quartz. This is probably windblown, aeolian, all right? It's this would have been the beaches at the Baraboo Cliffs. The Aeolian sands, conglomerate. Okay, here we are. Here's our GPS right there. So what are we looking at here? Well, something significant actually. Pretty significant. You look to my right, which is north, that way's north, and north. You see nearly vertical dipping beds of quartzite. It's all purple Baraboo quartzite that way to the south. From this point, this way to the north. It's all Cambrian sandstone. And you can see the beds are pretty level. Right here, there's some initial dip, but not that much. And you can see things like mud clasts in it and stuff. Why is this significant? Because this right here, going there down this way, is a near vertical Great Unconformity representing 1.2 to 1.3 billion years of missing time. This is a depositional contact. This is not a fault. So there is no evidence of a fault here. We don't see slicken sides on the sandstone or the quartzite. We don't see breccia. We don't see hydrothermal activity. We don't see evidence of a fault at all. And this is near vertical. If I was standing here 520 million years ago, right in this very spot, I would have been standing on the beach sands of the Cambrian, and there would have been quartzite cliffs going up this way. So the Great Unconformity isn't level, isn't flat lying everywhere. That's a misconception, and this is one of the best places to see it. We're going to see it, and we call this type of unconformity an angular unconformity. So you can see the beds in the sandstone right there. It's near level compared to near vertical. So we're going to go see another angular unconformity, just not as drastic as this. So this is where you have 1.2 about billion with a B years of missing time. This is your contact right here. Cambrian, Proterozoic. Both deposited sandstones. That's been deformed into a syncline and metamorphosed. This has not. Okay, we're about 50 feet, like I said, south of where we just were, about 10 to 15 feet higher in elevation. And what you see here is we are above the Great Unconformity. The actual contact between the conglomerate of the Cambrian and the quartzite is actually beneath our feet right here. But what you do see in the Cambrian here, you can see sharp contacts with the boulders. This is Cambrian sandstone, and this was a big quartzite boulder incorporated into it, and then more sandstone. You see the sharp contacts, all right? There's very little weathering on this quartzite. You also see things like pebbles. You see cobbles, more rounded. You see big boulders, and all you ever see is Baraboo quartzite in this Cambrian sandstone. You don't see anything else because this was derived from the Baraboo cliffs when they stood as islands during the Cambrian. And this is just a good outcrop because you can see the high variety of roundedness in the Baraboo quartzite. You see well-rounded boulders, you see angular pebbles. See, these pebbles are angular, those are rounded. You get a great diversity because this Cambrian seas, as they came up and covered this, were just pounding the cliffs over and over. And so you have some were recycled and rolled around numerous times, and others were pretty much broken off the cliffs, and why were they did. So this is just the boulder conglomerate, the Cambrian sands, on top of the Great Unconformity. So you see, you can get there's this notion of a sharp level unconformity just makes no sense. And even if you do find one, you'll find stuff right above it a lot of times showing you, cluing you into the fact that you have an unconformity below it. Like the cobbles and boulders in here, and eventually you go up section and this just becomes sand, or you get far enough from the Baraboo hills and all the quartzite boulders and pebbles are gone and all you get is sand, because they were derived from these hills as they stood as islands as the Cambrian seas came in. Now we have no one here, but just so you can see, that tape measure is in engineering. You have 1, 2, 3 feet. It's exposed at about a meter. That's about a meter, so you can tell. But yeah, so you can see how big these boulders are.